Hi everyone.
That is so funny. Welcome to another episode of The Cheeky Natives. I think the Cheeky Natives are just on a roll. We've had so many brilliant black women in the past few forevers. But today's no different. We've got the brilliant Nicole Dennis-Benn. So before we started this, I read something that said a heralded new writer, and I was having a kiki with Nicole and Letakunolo because she's no longer a new writer. She's an established talent. So it's quite exciting to have her on the Cheeky Natives. So, Nicole, welcome.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Yes, welcome to Joburg.
Yes, it's amazing. I love it here.
Welcome to South Africa.
Yes, definitely.
So Nicole has written 2 books. I'm just going to read the blurb of the first book, just so you know you can know what's in store of the first one, and then I'll read the one that we'll be discussing primarily on the podcast today, and then we'll obviously get Nicole to bless you with the reading.
So Nicole's debut is called Here Comes the Sun. I just want to let you know that when you have Marlon James writing that your book is a debut that stands at every turn, then we know that we're destined for amazing things. So in this radiant, highly anticipated debut, a cast of unforgettable women battle for independence while a maelstrom of change threatens their Jamaican village. At an opulent resort in Montego Bay, Jamaica, Margot hustles to send her younger sister Tandy to school. Taught as a girl to trade her sexuality for survival, Margot is ruthlessly determined to shield Tandy from the same fate. When plans for a new hotel threaten their village, each woman, fighting to balance the burdens she shoulders with the freedom she craves, must confront long hidden scars. From a much heralded new writer, Here Comes the Sun is a dramatic and profoundly moving glimpse into the heart of a vibrant, passionate world most outsiders simply see as paradise.
I mean,
Listen, I think Marlon James said everything we needed to say.
As women, and also socialized to respect our silences and shame more than our own voice. And so for me, once I had the platform to write our stories, to write our untold stories, it was like an open faucet where all the issues, everything that I was running away from on the island just came pouring out in both Here Comes the Sun and in Patsy. So things like classism, which is huge there still to this day in 2019, colorism, sexualization of our young girls, displacement of the working class poor Jamaicans, all these different things, religiosity and how that contributes to homophobia and transphobia. So all of those things together, for me, I wanted to really, as a writer, unpack. And especially given that Jamaica is a country that I claim but never claimed me back. As a working class black Jamaican queer woman, there was always like something inside me that still latches on, because I mean, it's my homeland, it's where my memories are, my family still live there. So naturally I'm going to definitely cling to Jamaica as home and look for validation and approval of Jamaica, right, itself. But when I wasn't getting that and realizing that, well, Jamaica will never claim me, so there's that shrug as well where, what's the use in exerting all that energy? So what I did, I put my frustrations in these characters, in these women, working class Jamaican women in particular. One of the questions I also get asked a lot is like, will you ever tap into the story of Jamaican men? And they already have their platforms. Toni Morrison got a similar question when she was asked, will you always write black people?
Yeah.
And for me, it's important for me to write black women, black Jamaican working class women. Why? Because our stories were never out there, and usually when it's told, we're usually caricatures. So now that I'm able to write the complexities, write everything that we go through, and you had mentioned earlier, the pains that we'd had to deal with, but in silence. It was really important to put that on the page, to give us the interior lives, to give us the complexities, tapping into everything. And so it was important to create Margot, Tandy, Dolores in Here Comes the Sun, and then Patsy and True in Patsy. Yeah.
There's the central premise of the book revolves around Patsy and this American dream.
Yes.
But in many ways, you show the complexities of the American dream. And I'm curious about why you chose to firstly make the American dream a central premise for Patsy, but also why to then write it in the way that you did, showing the less glamorous side of what of what it means to pursue the American dream at a time when immigrants in the US face so much persecution.
Yeah, you know, that's one of the things to get. A lot of people don't understand that immigrants in the US, undocumented immigrants, have always had a hard time in America. It's just that now the current administration, they're more vocal about it. But for a long time, they were getting deported, they were sidelined, couldn't get jobs, or if they had jobs, it had to pay them under the table. You know, or had no health insurance, nothing. They were just John Does and Jane Does existing. And I wanted to write that immigrant, that my father was that immigrant. You know, he came to America driving taxi cabs just to make ends meet and sending money back home to Jamaica for me to afford to go to a good school where I'm now able to do this. But I wanted, given that I've never seen that working class immigrant struggle, I wanted to write that onto the page, Jamaican immigrants in particular, because Edwidge Danticat, who's a Haitian American writer, she did it, you know, putting the lives of working class Haitian American immigrants on the page. And I looked and I was like, there was nothing from my country, from the Jamaican perspective. And I wanted to delve even deeper into that because I wanted people to see that, you know, we don't have to be perfect as black and brown immigrants to be accepted. You know, the common thing you hear is that we have to be everything, we have to dot all our I's and cross all our T's for everybody to accept us. We have to have our PhDs or MDs. We have to, you know, be of maybe a certain hue as well, you know. And so I am writing the Patsys who don't have that. They don't have the education or the right paperwork. And so, and also with Patsy making such an unpopular decision as to leave her child behind. So kind of stretching that reader's imagination and also their ability to empathize as well with a Patsy. So yeah.
I mean, you alluded to this now about Patsy leaving, true, right? So a large preoccupation of Patsy is about abandonment.
Yes.
Right? Which I thought you dealt with so beautifully because it's an abandonment that often we are also faced with, right? In the South African context, it's not across country, it's across provinces. So what happens is that our parents also believe Joburg or to be
in a big city
a dream,
like Cape Town.
like the dream, right? So there's this idea that we're leaving you for the betterment, but we understand in Patsy how you dealt with it. As Amma had said already, it's also not glamorous. You know, Patsy doesn't go to America and becomes a hit, right?
Yes.
Patsy struggles in America. Yeah.
Right, but so much of that happens all the time, right? Only if you have a particular amount of money and paperwork and degrees, you can have that glamorous, quote unquote, glamorous experience of a place. But this true story, I mean, even when I came to America with my degrees to go to college, I still had to acculturate, and it was still a hard time. So imagine somebody like a Patsy or the immigrants who are coming to these countries without the right paperwork, without the right education, and just to better themselves. But then the irony of that is that you're looking where the grass is greener, or the assumption that the grass is greener, but it's not, because if you don't have the things to stay into the country, like the documentation, there's no way you could actually be upwardly mobile. And I think this is such a crushing, it's a disappointment for many immigrants, right, to come to the country with that expectation that I'm going to be a hit, and then that doesn't happen. But then what happens is the shame of all of that, right? The shame of like, I'm supposed to be somebody but I'm not. So what happens when if you happen to be in contact with family members, you might want to give them the nice side of things, like, oh yeah, everything is great, I met wonderful friends, I got a managerial position at a bookstore, and you know, so those are the lies that we tell ourselves as immigrants and we tell other immigrants. So I had cousins and neighbors and relatives who went to the UK, went to the US, went to Canada, and they would write back saying these things. They own 2-story homes and they pose in front of nice cars, and then when you visit them in the States or in the UK, it's a completely different story. And that was really an inspiration behind a Patsy. You know, that was how the story started generating itself when I sat down and said, well, let me tell the other side of this immigration story, and wrote from there.
The theme of shame is quite an interesting one because it comes through in so many layers in this book. So there's almost like a universal shame among immigrants who can't go back,
right?
Because your papers are not okay, but you also can't go back because you don't feel like you've achieved much, right?
Right.
Because there's this very capitalist way of thinking. So when people think that you've left the country, you need to have accrued all of these things and these assets to come back.
Exactly.
And if you haven't, then you failed.
Exactly.
But there's also another kind of shame shame, and there's a shame as it relates to so we don't want to give away too much of the story, but there's an assault, or there's a childhood trauma that Patsy experiences, and Patsy then carries that shame into so many of the relationships and so many of the ways that she interacts with the world after that. Definitely. And I think that so much of that is also encompassed in her friendship with Cicely. And Cicely is trashy. Cicely is just a trashy person. She is trashy. But Cicely is trashy in ways that are just so interesting, right? Because I was actually thinking about her mother, right? As it relates to shame, and the ways that Cicely carried shame about her mother, but her mother was almost absolved from that shame. So her mother didn't carry that shame. And what does it mean to be a woman with no shame, right? Because even when people talk about Patsy having left True, there's a sense of shaming her. Like, why did you leave True? How could you leave True? What kind of shameless woman leaves her child? And shame seems to be an emotion that's almost solely reserved for women. For women and for queer people as well, shame is a thing. So there's no shame for cishet men who leave their children behind and go.
I mean, let's think about True's father, right? Let's think about True's father. He just gets to carry on with his life. Although he is somewhat involved, he's absolved from the shame of having to marry someone else, live in another home, and not continue with Patsy.
But Patsy chooses to make some unpopular decisions, and there's a shame that's attached to her.
With choice.
There's a shame. And for me, I thought that the theme of shame was a particularly interesting one, because it was highlighted in so many different ways for your characters, right? Like, there's a shame of like a childhood trauma that's never really dealt with. There's the shame of you having this child and maybe deciding that you don't want to be a mother. Patsy didn't particularly feel maternal, right? And there's like a sense of shame that people attach to her that she may not have had. And there's a shame that Cicely's mother is given. Like, she doesn't feel shame because she's got quite full ownership of what she does. I found the theme of shame to be particularly interesting.
And that was intentional, because as like you said so brilliantly just now, as women we're socialized to respect that shame, to know that we're policed by our own gender, but we're also policed by the broader society as well. And so to be able to be a Patsy, to be a woman who dares to utter out loud that she doesn't feel maternal, doesn't want to be a mother, is something, you're viewed as a pariah. Like, what, because I was saying on a panel at Open Book, like, we were given dolls at the age of 2 years old, right? And that already is like an expectation there, like this is something that motherhood is inevitable then, so I always wanted to write the woman who, it of course makes an unpopular decision, but the woman who dares to say to herself that this is not me, I'm actually walking away from those gendered expectations. Patsy was one such woman, but also a very interesting one as well, because she is not an academic, she's not an artist, she couldn't really articulate really what was really happening within her. All she knows is that she didn't want True, or she had nothing to offer True, because given the trauma that you mentioned earlier, her self-worth was stunted. Like at 9 years old, when her own mother is looking to the church and ignoring her, like there would be no food in the cupboard, but there'll be Jesus figurines all around. That says to a young child that I'm not worthy. So her own self-worth was in question, and then for her to now come of age and feel like, oh, she's looking in the mirror in the form of her own child, she already has a lot of self-loathing. So to see True is like she's looking at herself, and she can't afford that. She can't look in that child's eye and say, I can protect you from everything that I went through. So that's a big part of her walking away from True, in addition to fearing that she'd end up like her mother, Mama G, who was horrible as a mother. So she feared that she was trying her best to save True from that fate. So she shipped her off to Roy, True's father, who, yes, despite his machismo and despite his being this womanizer, whatever, he became a great parent, right? Not that he need to be applauded for that, because he is a parent. That's supposed to be something that he ought to be doing.
But True is actually better off with him in many ways.
Right, in many ways, right? He was able to accept her as a
and
gender
we have to applaud
non-conforming
Patsy,
person.
right? We have to applaud Patsy somewhat for that decision to be like, I know that Mama G raised me a certain way, and True's not going to be able to survive that.
Exactly.
So let me entrust it. So in some way, True made good decisions, even with the decisions that she made that were unquestionable. She was like, I know we can do this, so like let her go to Roy. And we really see True blossom and become when she's with Roy. I mean, the first few times with "You're not my mother," you know, those type of things. It's hard, but we see True really become, and True's relationship with Roy really strengthening. And I don't actually think that Roy and True would have had that relationship had Patsy been there.
Exactly. Right. So everything happens, you know, for that for a reason. And I always, you know, there's another thing to like, had Patsy been there, I'm wondering how much of a pressure should have put on True to conform to her gender. You know, like the last thing she said to her was, be a good girl and I'll come back for you. Kind of already trapping her in that box.
And now it seems
that she was so desperate herself to escape.
Yes,
she was so desperate to escape this box herself. Mental health is another theme.
Wow,
guys. Mental health, and I mean, reading Mama G, I had to just not be a doctor in that moment, because in that moment I was already diagnosing Mama G. I'm like, Mama G, you. No, because I felt that Mama G had a lot of psychological things that I think that we don't often speak about, and sometimes this like hyper religiosity can be a mask for certain things in our lives, right?
Exactly.
So it can also be a mask for us just not dealing with the things that we have to deal with. You know, that there was the admin of being a parent that I don't think Mama G wanted to deal with, and like. And also just some of these churches for me, like there's also questions about the ways in which the church interacts with black women who would otherwise feel shunned in society.
Right.
So in many ways Mama G felt shunned because there was no man in the house. There were all of these societal boxes that she didn't tick. Right?
Exactly.
And then the church comes. I mean, when she gives her pension to the church, I'm like losing my mind. I'm like, this man is using her as a testimony. How do you... And it's at an important time because in South Africa we're having that conversation about what is the role of the church as it relates.
Okay, good.
We're having an important conversation because what does it mean for the church to be an instrument of like change, or to be an instrument of important conversations, or to be a source of shelter? And I just don't know how that operates when there are people like Mama G who are allowed to almost just absolve themselves of all worldly responsibilities.
But I think what also that highlights is how, I don't want to say universal, but I'm going to use universal. How universal black experience is, right? So when I read about Mama G in Jamaica, I'm like, I know women like this in South Africa, right? Who have literally given themselves up to religion and are like, Jesus will take care of me. Because that's what Mama G was. Like, it's just like, you know, even telling Patsy, go with God, you know, God will guide you, you know, and just the idea
is empty and you're like, I'm like, Mama G,
so
baby
true.
girl.
I know, but you said something really important about mental health though, because a lot of these women, I mean, not a lot, I don't want to prescribe, you know, or diagnose people randomly, but coping mechanism for mental illness, which is another thing that's not spoken about in our country, in our culture. People turn to the church to help them with their depression. I mean, it will never be diagnosed, but it's something that they can look towards something better. That, you know, they can heaven would be better than earth. You know, they'll never be, their rights will be wrong. Everything could be amazing after death. And I always thought it was such a sad. You know, it was a little sad because I observed a lot of my family members who are religious, who also gave themselves to the church, gave up so many things. They gave up love for jewelry, gave up love for clothes, gave up everything, but also ignoring the household. And so using that as an inspiration to write a Mama G who did such thing, but in terms of the extreme of her also being mentally ill, but hiding under the umbrella of the church. And another thing too, that working class Jamaicans who can leave the island, they leave, right? Like the Patsy who migrate to America or the UK or Canada. But the Jamaicans who can't leave go to religion, because there's nothing else on the island for working class poor Jamaicans. So what else to do, right? So that's really what I was tapping into, the parallels between, yes, religiosity, which is definitely I call it poisonous on the island, especially when it really turns a lot of people's minds, you know, after them hating a lot of things, not only about themselves but others, but also there's that migration that happens constantly as well. So so that was really where I was
another
going with that.
important theme that I picked up from the book was relationships, but connected with relationships is this theme of abuse, right? So we find the relationship between Cicely and Patsy.
Trash.
Yeah. I mean,
I love it.
initially,
It's trashy.
Yes,
I'm sorry,
Cicely
but
is, yeah. Cicely
it
has
is
done a
so
lot.
trashy, and I'm so glad that you wrote a relationship between women to be trashy, because like, sorry Tlotli, but because it's almost unpopular for women to be multifaceted, right? So when women don't like each other, then it's like, women always hate on each other. Maybe I just don't like her because she's trashy, like Cicely. Like,
but I think,
Yeah.
like for me, right, it was thinking about Patsy's American dream was intricately tied to Cicely, right? And thinking about like arriving to America and waiting for Cicely, and then encountering a person you don't know, because Cicely was speaking in an American accent, speaking in American lingo, and Cicely was like with this husband, that she doesn't talk about a lot, and also Cicely had a child who she had never mentioned, so Cicely was effectively living a whole double life that she wasn't letting Patsy into, and Patsy comes there and lives into this home, right? And then Marcus, like,
I know,
guys, you know, there was a time like when I was reading about Marcus, I was like, no, Marcus, no.
But you know, can I say what the appeal of Cicely is to Patsy? Cicely is that light-skinned, near white friend, and again, being socialized in our country that's so classist and so like, you know, colorism, exactly. So she's as a dark-skinned black girl looking at Cicely chose Patsy as a friend, right? That line in itself was powerful, in that Patsy, who has limited self-worth, has all this stuff loading. A girl like Cicely looks at her on the playground in primary school, is like validation of her work.
And Cicely is a user.
She latches on, exactly. Patsy latches on to Cicely for that reason, but Cicely uses her privilege. Cicely, whether or not Cicely was aware of it, she had to have known, right? She had to have known that she's pulling Patsy on a string. Yeah, exactly. So when she gets to America and Patsy sees that, well, Cicely is actually living the trophy wife experience, which a lot of people, you know, when you look at those women, that's the expectation. So actually have it that she is actually swallowed by those expectations, because she's actually the most, even though Cicely was toying with Patsy's emotions, she's actually the most tragic one in the book. How she ends up.
No, that's true. And also there's this you do something, Nicole, you do something so brilliantly.
I'm even feeling so emotional thinking about this.
I love it.
The brilliant thing that you do is you do this. So you talk about otherness and foreignness, right, in the context of people who themselves have migrated, right? So Patsy comes from Jamaica and comes to New York, and she's encountering Cicely and Marcus, who themselves are other in America.
Yes,
right?
Who other? Marcus is such an other, and it also speaks to this idea that you almost feel like you can attain. It's like almost an aspiration to whiteness, or an aspiration to what you consider to be the going standard of like what is beautiful or what is great, right? And I mean, because Patsy knows that it's almost unattainable for her to have the standard of beauty that Cicely has, because Cicely forms all these, like, she takes all these European understandings of beauty, or these Western ideals of beauty. She's light skinned, her eyes are a different color, she kind of glows, you know. Patsy knows that she'll never do that, so the closest thing for her is proximity to that, right? In the same way that Marcus achieves so much of what he thinks to be success, which is just proximity to whiteness, right?
Gentrifying,
he's an
just placing black people,
right?
And also when he talks, but doesn't Marcus sound like a better black? So we call them better blacks in South Africa, right? Like uppity blacks. When he starts
against his own people, exactly.
And how many like middle to upper class black people do that? Like you then start to speak disparagingly of the environment in which you come from, of black people, like, oh, these blacks, when you are an American black. Like, I found that to be such an interesting commentary on the ways in which people just aspire to certain standards just by proximity, and even if that proximity means disparaging yourself or people who look like you or people who sound like you, as long as you attain some sort of proximity, right? It doesn't matter what the cost may be.
Okay, she's reading Marcus. Yes.
Yes. But also, Marcus. The men in the book are very interesting for me, because the men in the book are very trashy, all of them. Like, all of them in various facets.
I love it. That's your guys' favorite word, trashy. I love it.
So one, you've got Roy, who initially is a little trashy, but needs to own up responsibility, but is still trashy to his woman.
Yes.
Like, he's still very trashy to his woman and to his kids. Like, it's just, I think that
His sons.
Yeah,
Nicole
yeah.
is fire
Yeah.
because Nicole, for me, made a powerful comment about the fathers of feminist daughters. So many feminists have fathers who are really trashy in the ways that they behave towards their significant others, but are so allowing of their daughters to be feminist and to be free and to be powerful. And so
that's what Roy did for True.
Yes,
he gave True
yeah.
so much freedom to be
Let
herself.
you be what you want to
Down
be.
to her,
right?
yeah. But could not ever extend himself to understand why Marva felt the way that she did about so many of the trashy things that he did, or even to allow her to just have an opinion in the way that True was allowed to be opinionated. True often stopped short of telling her dad to just F off. She's in ways that Marva could not. Even when Marva was calling him out, Marva had to call him out with like respect and caution in ways that he didn't show her. You bring your child to my house, and I must just raise this 4-year-old out of the.
He didn't even ask her, right?
No, he just
even
it's the patriarchy though. It's just
right.
like, this is my house, I pay the bills here. You're gonna do what I'm about to say, and you're gonna do it well. But also, I found that Nicole also explored something really beautiful in terms of Marva remothering, and by this I mean like building a relationship with True, because it must be really challenging to mother other people's children.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
in that proximity,
Definitely.
And
Particularly in that context.
in that context. So I felt that you did something. It was something that we had to grapple with. You know, Marva grappled a lot with the fact that at some point she was now falling in love with True. When True was waiting for this mysterious phone call that happened from her mother, Marva was the one who was more concerned about her well-being, about her emotional well-being. So in some ways, like, you know, Marva was remothering, you know, and Marva, shame.
Yeah, Marva, I felt for Marva.
Marva was one of my favorite characters to write, honestly. I felt a lot for her. You know, because she was trying hard, and you know, one of her biggest things that she always wanted a girl, right? So thinking True would be that for her, you know, so embracing True, which of course, as we well know, is way different. You know, she steps definitely way outside that gendered expectation. So
let's speak about America for a bit, right?
Yeah.
So,
coming to America.
Patsy gets to America, and has this tragic things that happen with her with Cicely and that trashy Marcus, and then she has to find her way, right? And it's hard, guys.
It's
Hi,
really hard.
man.
I thought that was important.
Patricia went through a lot. Even there, I was like, "Oh, Patricia, can you get a break?"
I was so mad at Nicole. I'm like, can she catch a break though?
Yes.
But is that not so many black women's lives that you just cannot catch a break? That if you are not fleeing from being abused and assaulted in your home country, then you go on to be an immigrant woman, to be working and being paid under the table, and the vulnerability that you then experience as an undocumented person.
Yeah.
What does
And
that
how
look
the
like?
system treats you.
And the first choice that Patsy made, the first mindful choice that she made, was that she's not going to be married to a man.
Yes.
Right? Because that could have, like a Cicely, gotten her passes in terms of the paperwork, the green card, at a time when, you know,
and it seems that
marriage was not legal.
And that's the situation that you really try to wrestle with, because we've got Fiona who's like, I'm just trying to get married because I'm trying to get the papers. So you've got this idea of like people going and wanting to do this for the marriage, and Patsy's trajectory is very different, because her deliberate decision not to do that changes her lived experience and how she will access America in a massive way.
Because in her mind, she want her first marriage experience, honestly, from Patsy's heart, would be with Cicely. It would be with a woman.
Definitely.
She didn't see anything.
Trashy Cicely.
So she couldn't perceive anything other than that. You know, which is why Fiona mocked her in that scene where she's like, "Oh, you know, we can't afford to love in this country. You know, love is not going to get you papers. You know," and that's something that's really strong coming from Fiona.
But you said even just what you said now is very powerful, because it speaks about a dehumanization, right? That immigrant in many countries are not allowed access to humanity
Exactly.
in the way that
Unless
citizens.
they're exceptional.
Yeah.
Unless
Right.
they're exceptional immigrants.
Unless they're exceptional.
Unless
right.
you are getting your third PhD from Harvard or you're saving someone from a burning building.
Yes.
There is no accessibility.
Or you're climbing all the buildings to save a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
really interesting, Nicole. Like for me, I thought that was such a powerful commentary about like the life of immigrants, right, in countries that are not theirs.
Yeah.
In terms of how they have no access to humanity.
Right.
Just because they don't have papers.
Right, exactly, and
There's
that's exactly. I mean, the thesis, the entire thesis of that book, like unpacking that, and as bad as this word sound, humanize these people. Because
Yeah.
I mean, yes, we're human.
Give them a face, give them a
Right,
life. Like it's just
exactly.
not the lady who cleans or minds your
Yes,
babies.
or
It's
not-
actually someone who has a life.
right,
Who has a
exactly.
story, who holds some worth, right?
Yes.
And I think there's some joys in this book. I know we've spoken about the trashy people in this book, but guys, there's some joys in this book.
Yes.
So for me, when Patsy comes into her own, Patsy came into her own in different ways, right? And for me, it was her having the language to describe certain things that have happened to her.
Yeah.
Because I think that's
Are you talking about the abuse?
so many things.
Yes.
But so many things, right? So not
Definitely.
just the abuse, but also the mental illness and not being able to name depression for what it is, but finally finding a language for the darkness that overtakes her.
Right. Remember when she even walked into the Rite Aid expecting that she can get Prozac, right? Something as simple as that is her own way of saying I need help, but having
And an
no health
acknowledgement,
insurance.
yes.
Yeah.
Because that would have never happened when she was in Jamaica.
Right.
Mama G would have just said, let's pray about
Right,
it.
let's pray
The people
about
from
it,
church
yeah.
would have come to lay their hands on her, but there would have not been space for her to acknowledge that there's this thing happening in her brain and that darkness is not some evil spirit descending on her, right? And it gave, in many ways, Patsy came into her own because she started developing a language
Right.
and a loss almost of the shame, right? Because she starts to
Exactly.
speak about it. She speaks about it to Fiona. She says, sometimes the darkness comes, this is what happens to
Right.
me. And I don't know that she would have been able to do that in Jamaica. I don't know.
And when she even gathered the strength to say it to her employer, and he fired her on the spot.
Yes, yes.
You know, that's another something
Yes.
that could easily have silenced her. Which
And-
it
And also,
partially
in
did, a
some
little
ways,
bit.
it's like the precarity of immigration.
right.
So it's like, well, girl, you're not gonna come to work because of
Exactly.
darkness? Nah,
There
they're
was
gonna make some money.
no empathy. Like, tell me more. Like nothing. It was
And she falls in love, guys.
Before we
She
before we
falls
go
in
to
love.
love, before we go to love,
right. Because all right, before we go to
before we
that,
go
what
to love,
happens?
because
What happens?
do you know Nicole? I had to leave
Nicole
the
put
book
us through a lot.
because
I think
Nicole,
it's the scene where I stopped reading and I went. There was a day I just left this book
Nicole,
and I took a
Yes.
break.
you know the encounter at the subway,
Oh, Barrington.
Barrington. Ah,
I'm done. Nicole, I was done.
Nicole,
I just want to let you know.
this is a line. Listen to Nicole. This is the first time that Patsy has seen a man fly. Full stop.
Okay.
I was just like, what a brilliant
And
take.
explain yourself, boo.
I have some
Explain
explaining
yourself,
to do.
please.
First of all, when we talk about immigration, right, and going to a particular country that you feel like you're gonna make everything's gonna be better.
Yeah.
No one wants to come to that particular country to die, right? It's not their motivation, it's not their want, their desire. So for Patsy, that moment was a pivotal moment for her because she's realizing that, oh my goodness, if I don't do something about my own life now, I could actually end up like a Barrington. You know, in terms of like how tragic his story was. Here he was working in construction. He wasn't protected by any insurance, nothing. Fell, broke his back, and that was it.
And now that was it.
Right.
That stopped his livinghood.
Exactly. And so because he had nothing else to offer, saying to himself he's not half of a man, you know, again exploring that gender and like the expectations of masculinity.
Yeah.
And how that actually just crushed him to the point where he's like, he was already gone before he flew, quote unquote, especially for our readers who haven't gotten there yet. He was already gone. And so I wanted that to be a pivotal moment where Patsy now makes an active decision in her own life
To live, right? To
exactly.
live, because I
Yeah.
feel
And
like
she starts
there
to-
was like a resurrection of some sorts, right?
Exactly.
When Patsy was like, "Oh wait, I have not been living, and now I need to make a decision to live.
Yeah.
Because the spirit and the conversation with Barrington sort of haunts her.
Exactly. Yeah. Even they're bolstering, like getting the courage now to ask Claudette out, something she would never have done, right? Or even like all these different things that started happening to her all of a sudden. This self-awareness, because in the back of her mind, Barrington left her with this, like, how is it your fate when you have control over it?
Come on.
Yeah. So that was something that. Yeah, I wanted to
and the cry, when she cries, guys, when Patsy, because there's almost like, it's like a climactic moment, because all of these things happen to Patsy, and Patsy never she never expresses how she feels about it. So Patsy intellectualizes a lot of things.
Yes.
She intellectualizes the darkness. She intellectualizes what sounds like a postpartum depression. She intellectualizes how she feels about the abandonment, how she feels about the abuse, how she feels about almost this hypersexuality that follows all of that.
Exactly.
But she never ever tell you, hardly see, except when she speaks about Cicely. But even when she speaks about Cicely, it's almost superficial, because it's very much an admiration.
Right, for her beauty.
For her beauty. It's external, but it's
there's
never
also a tenderness that which she holds for Cicely. Because I feel like in some words, Patsy does not find herself without Cicely, and I love the fact that what you said earlier, Alma, about her becoming, because then it was outside of Cicely in some ways, right?
Right.
But Patsy was trashy.
Yeah.
Patsy was trashy.
Because guys know Patsy, hi man. Patsy was trashy. Because Patsy doesn't calls true once.
Okay, so now that's another story. So now that part, she by that point when she's like taking control, it's a shame. Again, back to shame. It's a shame that's preventing her from doing that call that she should have done. But is that shame again? Like, if she does that now, how would that be received? She doesn't feel like she has earned that yet. Like, she felt like she has lost all rights at that point, because it's an explaining to do. Like, how do you explain that? How do you explain that wide gap? By this point, her daughter is now 16 years old. How do you at that point in the book, she didn't have any explanation, and she was just avoiding. So her only thing was to just fill that barrel with things, with gifts, hoping that it will solve the problem. As naive as that sounds, that was how Patsy perceived it to be. That was her apology, and we found out that that things go awry. So
it's an interesting commentary for me, right? In the sense that you spend this book wrestling with feeling two ways about Patsy. There's a deep empathy that you feel for Patsy, because Patsy has experienced so much. Like, Patsy's really gone through so much.
And there's a human face to immigration, right?
And there's a human face to immigration, but then there's also like a simultaneous sort of feeling of anger and frustration with Patsy, because Patsy has spent her whole life feeling abandoned
by Mama G. And
but
does the same thing.
To do the same thing.
Right.
And it's the ways in which people can simultaneously straddle those kinds of identities, that in many ways you can be a victim of so many things that have happened to you, but then perpetrates almost a similar kind of violence to the people that you hold close.
Exactly.
And it made me think about generational trauma, speaking to him.
And that was something that I tap into. I really wanted to get at that generational trauma, because one thing is that we, the reader, can see that Patsy's obviously recycling the actions that was done to her, right? But she can't see that. I mean, she doesn't have the luxury of sitting in a therapist's chair to get her therapy.
Like, hey, it's trauma. It's
exactly
trauma.
right.
Trauma, what it do though?
Right. So she's navigating this as best she could. Yeah. So because it could be another story where I've seen women on the subway in New York City, for example. You know that this is something that they did not want, right? But you see the way how they talk to their kids or treat their kids, and it's like this anger that comes out. So what happens? I mean, that's the woman who stays and relived trauma and physically abuses her child or ignores her child, whatever. But then the woman who flees, she's also being questioned, and she's also being made to feel ashamed of that decision, that she doesn't want to impart the same things, even though psychologically she doesn't connect the two, but she flee because she didn't want to pass on the trauma to True. In her mind, that's how she reasoned it.
And she's also trashy because she did that other thing that we won't say, but she did that other thing to Fiona, and I didn't like that. But we were not going to say what it is, but she did the other thing.
But it wasn't surprising, Cloche, and I'll tell you.
No, I agree with you,
because of the ways in which Patsy has navigated her relationships with certain people. I don't want to say too much, but the ways in which Patsy has been socialized to navigate her relationships with certain people, so much of that is also imbued in the self-sabotage, right? So that before people can hurt you,
right,
you harm them, so that you almost have a feeling of like, I've divorced myself from this. And it's not to say, oh, you know, people love to like regurgitate hurt people, no. But it's to say that there are really many very self-sabotaging ways in which people behave that are so intrinsically linked to the ways in which they've been socialized to believe that things are almost inevitable. It's almost inevitable. So remember, Cicely, she goes to Cicely, who is like her BFF, best friends forever. And what does Cicely do? Cicely lets her down. And this is like a continued, like almost like a reinforcement of the idea that the people in your life are always going to let you down. So I wasn't shocked. I mean, when she did that, I was like, Patsy, you're trashy, but I saw this.
But I think what Nicole also does, at least my reading of Nicole, you know, is Nicole also
check him if he's wrong.
Nicole also does a very interesting thing about connecting Patsy's sexuality, particularly in relation to men, with grief.
Yes.
Right? So Patsy is abandoned. Patsy is grieving Sicily, grieving True, giving Jamaica, and the only way that she says, and Patsy even says this about herself, to fall herself is to be with these men. We know that the encounters that Patsy has with sexual relations with men has to do with a form of wanting to fill a void or wanting to avoid grief. And I thought that was so brilliantly when you did that. Like, so for me, it was that. It was that she's trashy, but it was also the exploration. It was the exploration of like, she doesn't want to interrogate with what she's going through. So the avoidance for her is participating with sex with men.
But also that reclamation of control almost, right? And ownership, because remember that there are certain instances in her life where Patsy has not been in control of the ways in which she interacts with men, right? And now that she's an adult, it almost feels like she thinks that she's reclaiming control, but the ways in which she's doing it is very destructive.
And that was also intentional as well, you know, because you know she experienced that childhood trauma, and never having gotten over that at all. So to use men that way, but that fake, false sense of control that she has when that happens, only to realize that she ends up even more empty after the act.
Because that's how she feels. She's just like, I don't know why I did this, but I did it, and in the moment it felt good, but it didn't feel good.
But Mama G's is also like, I just want to have a moment for Mama G, because I felt that you were making a statement about community complicity, right? So this thing happens to Patsy as a child, and their immediate response is for Mama G to be like, oh, you know, wow, I'm shocked. But there's no interrogation, right? And there's almost this thing that we do to black girls where we apportion blame to them instead of people who behave in almost in despicable ways towards them. And I feel like so much of that was a discussion about community complicity. So when that thing happened to Patsy, why did no one ask questions?
No one questioned. And Patsy even said it herself, or thought it. Being from Pennyfield, and again, working class black Jamaican woman, silence, you're not looked at as a human being, you're only looked at as a product of your community. And so, you know, the underserved, underprivileged individuals, and that's what happens. And Mama G, she was too into the clouds to see that her daughter was being violated, to even ask her who did this. Nothing like that came out of Mama G.
But in some ways, Mama G knew. I feel like it's like, you know, like black communities.
Like that's a community.
There's a shame of that.
We know.
The
uncles.
Exactly.
So Mama G, I felt in some ways didn't want to take accountability for what she knew the reality was.
Exactly. And somehow in the first chapter, when Patsy said, so, you know, if it weren't for Uncle Curtis, I would starve to death. And that awkward pause that Mama G had was kind of like an acknowledgement of all the guilt that was unsaid. But I'm glad that you've interpreted that as Mama G probably knew, and she probably did.
And also, but the knowing is interesting. And the knowing for me does nothing for Mama G, because if Patsy says, if it wasn't for Uncle Curtis, we would go starving. So Mama G's silence is complicit, but also a socio-economic factor. It's like, if I call this man out, we're not going to eat.
We're not going to eat, Right.
And also Patsy then taking it upon herself to participate in the trauma, and I'm saying participate not in a voluntary way because it was rape, but to participate because of, if it wasn't for Uncle Curtis, we would have gone hungry.
Exactly. And
And what
it's
it
deeper
means,
when you think, all the opening up those wounds. But
what it means for young black girls to be forced into positions where they have to make those kinds of decisions, right? And what does that mean for Patsy moving forward as an adult? What does it mean to have been subjected to that kind of childhood abandonment, that kind of childhood trauma, and then not even being given a space to be able to name the things that have happened to you, right? So I don't know that Mama G would be receptive to a conversation about her own complicity in this situation.
No, she wouldn't have.
She wouldn't, because
she doesn't have the capacity.
And what does it mean to have black girls raised in communities that don't have the capacity to acknowledge their pain and to acknowledge their traumas?
Yes.
This is how you end up with a Patsy. Right there. But we have to
we have to talk about the love.
We have to talk about Claudette.
We have to talk about
I was in love with Claudette. Like I read the description of her, I'm like, okay, Claudette can get it, guys. Claudette is
I was just like so taken by
Claudette is everything.
How present and commanding Claudette was. Her presence was very commanding, because the first encounter at the Jamaican station, it's just striking. Like it's just like I was like, even me, I want to be with Claudette.
I was very familiar. But she was also unapologetic, right? And I thought that framing
appealed to me as well. Yeah,
that framing was powerful, because here is Patsy. Here's this woman who has almost always just felt that she was not enough, but also too much at the same time, and just straddled these two strange identities. And now she's around Claudette. Claudette is so unashamedly herself, right? Claudette makes decisions that are unpopular. So she chooses not to get married. She doesn't have children. She doesn't want to have children. And she's in complete ownership of that, right? And I also felt that Nicole was making an important statement about. So people often say, you just need to, there's almost like the prevailing popular logic that you have to completely have it together and almost be perfect before you are worthy of other people loving you, right? And Patsy is a mess when she meets Claudette. She is messy.
Which is why I don't think she was ready yet to receive Claudette fully. You know,
I agree.
Because she didn't really love herself fully just yet. She
still had feelings for Cicely.
Right.
But there was space for her. Like Claudette had room for her, right?
Yes.
In ways that are patient, but we're not like, there's this popular rhetoric like, oh, just build him. Like, not in that way. That relationship was so wholesome, because Claudette calls her out when she's being problematic and trashy, but in ways that don't diminish how she feels.
And also Claudette is like, I'm here and I want to stay, and I love that. Because it's a commentary of often in relationships, right? We push people away, because a lot of what Patsy was doing was pushing people away because of her own unworthiness, right? Because of her own really, am I you, me?
Right, why me?
And Claudette was like steadfast, right? And I wanted to know, like, Nicole, what are your own like thoughts, right? So because you write love so well, particularly in that type of love, right? That type of love was like a wholesome, here to stay type of love. And I wanted to know why it was important for you to vessel that as well.
I really wanted to write love between two women, like real good, pure love between two women on the page. I feel like as a lesbian woman myself, never seen that in books or reading literary fiction where it's erased, it's edited out, it's you're not supposed to even write sex, you're not so to write love like that, and it's not gimmicky, and it's not trash, or it's not gonna be shoved in the back shelf of a bookstore because on the LGBTQ, it speaks volumes when a young person, a young lesbian or a young queer person picks it up and see that authentic love on the page. It's important. So with a Patsy and a Claudette, I do give them enough complexity where there's a push and pull, but at the same time Claudette is able to say to Patsy, listen, you clearly don't love yourself, right? And like you said, she gives her that room to grow. She pushes her back, say, you know what, come back when you're ready. And people might say, oh wow, she might be naive, but she's not naive. What she's doing is securing the fact that, well, Patsy could actually be in a relationship and be consumed by thoughts of Cicely, or she could give her that opportunity to see Cicely for who she really is, or have the love between them, like have her work that out before she come into the relationship the way how she needs to be in the relationship, right?
And
as whole.
That last story was amazing.
I also
one of the highlights of the book. I
Thank you.
I loved True, guys. True's my home girl, but True's my home person, actually, just for a lot of reasons. I think that True comes into her own, right? So Martha has this idea of what she, because True's the one character in the book who really rebels against other people's ideas of what she should be.
Right. Yes.
And is so steadfast and is so powerful in the way that she does that, even at great personal costs, right?
Yes.
Because there's some personal cost to the ways in which True navigates that space. But True is so true to herself.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
she follows the name, right? Because when I first I was like, True, why should you name your child True? But okay.
Exactly.
But it's in so keeping with True's character, and I think that True manages to bring out so much of the goodness in the people around her. Like, she comes as a little girl, Marva struggles, but she somehow brings out the maternal in Marva.
Yes.
Roy is a mess.
Yes.
But the ways in which Roy interacts with True force him to grow up a little bit, and also to just develop some emotional maturity.
Exactly.
But the ways in which Patsy also comes back to True, right, in some of the maturity, in some of that almost there's a sense of like restitution, like they come back and there's a sense of restitution, and it's so hopeful. The relationship is so hopeful because True is watchful, but she's not closed off to her mother coming back to her. And for me, True's up there with Claudette. Like, she's like one of my favorite characters in the book.
Yeah, she was my favorite too. Like, writing this woman or this person, it's interesting because True would not say that she's a girl or a boy. She's a person that's like a person, a soccer player, right? So it's interesting, like, speaking her pronoun, but for the sake of like not confusing our readers or the listeners.
But also she's socialized. True is socialized as a woman.
Exactly.
Yeah. Even though her personal identity is not, she in this sense is socialized as a woman. I think you do something really interesting for me personally, and for us, I mean, I spoke a lot about this. For me, the relationship between Claudette and Patsy sort of is like loving without language. Like it's not labeling. For Patsy, it wasn't an obsession of I'm in a lesbian relationship, I'm a black woman. It was just like I'm loving this person, and a part of it
secure and it's safe and it's
and a part of it is a commentary on True coming from a very religious Jamaica, which shunned queerness, and now coming into liberation, but still holding those like thoughts behind, right? It's just like
it's like Claudette's, but I mean even True is like
and True's
right. But also too, you wonder what labels are. If labels is like a Western way of boxing us in to putting us in categories, because maybe because for example, right, I knew so many feminists growing up in Jamaica, right, women who would never call themselves feminists, right, but the actions, like in terms of what they're doing, doing what men would do, and speaking up in the faces of men, all these things, but feminism would be stamped on them had they been in a situation where they could be boxed into that. Similarly with LGBTQ, or like a Patsy, who obviously she loves women, and obviously she desires to be in a long-term relationship with women, but would never define herself as a lesbian. Same with Margot in Here Comes the Sun, who would never define herself as a lesbian, but she loves Verdine more, right? So given that I'm working with these women, these Jamaican women, these Jamaican working class women, I don't want to push language in their mouth that they would never say themselves. Right? So that's something.
We could be here for 3 hours.
I also want to commend you, because Nicole can write sex, guys.
Thank you.
Sexy.
Thank you so much.
Yes. I want to know, Nicole, like, I felt the ending of Patsy was personally for me and satisfying. I was just like, I don't know. Why did you choose to end the book in the way that you did?
Life is messy.
I didn't want to have it where it's like complete closure, where it ends with Patsy and True physically reconnect with each other. I wanted to leave it open-ended because I wanted the reader to insert their own imagination in like what the possibilities of what could happen, right? I mean, that probably True has her visa. She could probably visit Patsy, or she had this scholarship, like all these different things that could possibly possibly happen. But then you think about the meeting at a coffee shop or something that would, it would be a little awkward for sure, because they're bridging a 10-year gap or even more.
Yeah.
So, you could actually imagine that. And so I didn't want to give everything there in the ending. I wanted to read a note to
and there's
their own.
also this parallel, right? Because I'm just like, imagine if Patsy and True honestly spoke to each other about their lives, how they could connect on a cellular love level, right? To
Definitely.
be like, and I like that, right? I was just like, oh, when are they going to talk about
it?
it?
Yeah. It's like, if you have not interacted with somebody in 10 years, there are going to be difficulties in the way that you interact.
Yes.
And it's almost inauthentic to believe that just because, and that's like a common rhetoric, like just because you're related to somebody doesn't mean that that relationship will automatically be there. There's work that needs to be done. It's why Black parents can spend their children's like youth and adolescence being very strict and being very hard and like not crazy, and then expect your adult children to almost have this kinship with you. That's not true, right?
Right. You have to earn that trust. You have to earn it.
I thought that was
I thought
that was a powerful commentary on that.
Definitely.
That like relationships are that. Like almost biology and blood doesn't determine relationships. That you have to work and that you have to earn relationships, and that's like an idea that we're still coming around to as a community. That like just by virtue of being my relative, it doesn't mean that
I can trust you just yet.
Yes.
Nicole,
I love this.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Because you know what,
a great
Nicole,
discussion. I'm gonna save this conversation because it was everything. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much for writing about Black women, immigrant women, Black queer women in the way that you have. I loved what you said, that you wrote them because you couldn't see them on the page. That was really powerful for me.
Definitely.
That we want to see ourselves on the page, so we need to write ourselves in.
That if there's a story that exists, that if there's a story that you want to read, but that doesn't exist, to write it.
You gotta write it.
And I mean, Tony's great. And you wrote a piece in the well-read Black Girls called Unbeloved. And honoring the legacy of Toni Morrison and how Toni inspired you. And I wanted you to talk like a little bit about, the legacy and the role of Toni Morrison for your own life and for your own writing.
Oh my God, she gave me permission to talk about everything that I put in my work, the complexities of women's lives, working class Jamaicans or women in particular, also sex, you said that right, sex well. Toni Morrison gave me permission to do all of that, to write women's sexuality on the page. And also because one of the things with when I was coming into the game as a writer, I never thought I had, even though I was in an MFA program, I wasn't reading Black writers. I was not given James Baldwin in classes. I was not given Alice Walker. I was never given Toni Morrison in any course I've ever taken. And so for me now to latch on to these individuals who I've seen how they write their characters and who looks like me, and her hair was even like in dreadlocks. I was like, whoa, if she can do it, I can as well. And that was really what gave me permission to now use my voice, and so that's why I had to write about her in Well-Read Black Girl, in Dearly Beloved, because had I not find her book beloved and not discarded in that library in high school, I don't know if I would ever come to literature this way, because she planted a seed of curiosity in me to continue doing this, and so I'm really grateful for that.
Nicole, we are incredibly grateful.
Thank you.
One, for extending yourself in the way that you have in your writing and also in our conversation today.
Thank you so much. It was
we
wonderful.
have an interesting way of rating books. Okay. We don't give people 5 stars,
popcorn. No, we don't do that.
No. So we discuss, we read the book, we look at the topics, the writing, and then afterwards, then we're like, what land should we give Nicole?
So we have a land project. We should contextualize it. So there's an important conversation happening around land in South Africa, where we have a history of land dispossession. We have a history of the majority of this country's population being dispossessed, and it's a long history of this country's majority being dispossessed. And so in many ways, the act of taking the land back is an important part of reclamation and of correcting so much of what's wrong that's been done in this country. So just to contextualize why we give land as the cheeky native.
I love that.
And so you've been in the beautiful Cape Town.
Yes.
But we think you deserve a lush wine farm. You deserve a wine farm
Yes.
with many various grapes.
So you can write
you can
more
write,
books.
exactly.
Yes, I would love that.
So we'll give you a
Thank
wine
you.
farm in the beautiful French Hook because you deserve
Nice.
only the best.
Thank you
So you
so
have
much,
a
guys.
wine farm in French Hook.
Waiting for you.
Thank you. I'm honored.
Once again, thank you so much to Nicole. This book is everything. And I really feel like this has been such an important conversation to have. And I do know that everybody who's listening to this podcast is going to go and buy all her books.
Thank you.
Because Nicole's such a prodigious writer, and it's so great to have such a prodigious talent here with us today. And we can't wait until you're in South Africa again.
Yes.
And where
I
can
love this
people
place.
find you if they're looking for you, Nicole?
So I'm online. Of course, there's my website, NicoleDennis-BennPatsy. I'm also on Twitter at ndennisbenn. I guess ndennis_Ben, BENN. And on Instagram at ndennisbenn, no space. And on Facebook as well, I have an author page. So feel free to follow me anywhere and tag me in books or conversations, whatever. Yes.
Yay, thank you so much, Nicole. Until next time, Cheeky Natives. Bye.
Yay.